my name's Claudia Martin and I study a PhD at the University of East Anglia in Norwich. I'm based in the biology department and I'm interested in studying evolution and adaptation across island endemic birds in the wild. So really, how did I get here? Well, I started doing my A-levels at home in Bath, and I found it really difficult to choose which A-levels to take. So I first started by doing 5 different subjects, which was a bit crazy really. And then this is back when you used to be able to do AS levels, and I ended up dropping chemistry and maths and leaving geography, biology and physics, which I ended up having my 3 A-levels in. So yeah, then I started thinking about what I wanted to do at university, and I wasn't really sure what universities would want for the different subjects that I wanted to do. So I was quite interested in the environment and biology, so I ended up putting together university applications for both environmental science and biology, and put a few applications for 5 different universities together. So I really ended up deciding going to Cardiff University. This was for a couple of reasons. I chose their biology course partially because it was quite broad and it still had environmental aspects to the project. It was also quite close to home, and I liked the area around the southwest, so that was really good, and also it allowed me the opportunity to do a placement year. So a placement year is basically in your 3rd year of 4 years of university. You're able to take a year where you do something related to your subject, but outside of university. So I opted to do this course, which adds this additional year to university. And in this year I went to a place called Slimbridge, the Wildfowl and Wetlands Trust, which is based in Gloucestershire. So as I said, I was really excited by the environment and ecology. And this allowed me to spend a whole year working mostly outside, doing conservation management on the reserve that they have there. So it's a 400-acre reserve that we were managing, and this involves sort of driving tractors as well as strimming the land, and also monitoring the conservation priority bird species that we had there. So lots of waders like curlew and lapwing that nest there. So that was really exciting. Also in that year I did a project looking at lead poisoning and mute swans in the wild. So lead poisoning is a big problem for these birds, and so this allowed me to investigate these problems associated with lead that's deposited in the land, and gave me a bit of more of an insight into research, which I hadn't managed to do yet in my undergrad degree. Then I finished my degree at Cardiff, so after my placement year I went back for my final year and finished my degree, and came out with a biology degree with this placement year. So I guess after my degree I didn't really know exactly what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to do something research based potentially, and I wanted it to have some kind of environmental impact or conservation impact. So this actually ended up taking me back to Cardiff. I spent a few months at home, and then went back to Cardiff for a whole year, and worked with my lecturers there, and also did some tutoring with A-level and GCSE students. That was really good fun and allowed me to step back and think about where I wanted to go next. And during this year I then applied for PhDs. So a PhD is basically a 4-year research position where you get to study one particular project for 4 or 5 years potentially. And so I applied for several projects, so 3 or 4 projects that all had some kind of biodiversity impact related to conservation, or some had genetics as part of the project. So I ended up getting the PhD at UEA, and that's where I am now. So I'm currently in my final year of my PhD, which is a bit scary. So I've been studying the project that I'm interested in for 3 years so far. So my project's basically looking at evolutionary adaptation in a bird that lives on the islands in the Canary Islands and also Madeira and the Savagins, so 3 groups of islands. It lives here and nowhere else in the world. So we're really interested in how this particular bird has evolved in relation to these different habitats that we see there, and also environmental pressures. So across these islands we have different prevalence of disease, and as you might be aware, different birds and different animals are really affected by the levels of disease that they have in their populations.
So we refer to things like disease as selection pressures. So these selection pressures may drive evolution of birds in the wild. So to understand these pressures, we conduct fieldwork where we are able to catch the pipits. So while on fieldwork, sometimes we wander across these islands, sometimes having to carry all of our kit. And then what we do is we set out our bird traps, which are a bit like small tents for the pipits. So we play a playback recording, so this is basically the male's breeding call, to entice the pipits in their territories. So these birds come down and come and see what's going on, and hopefully when we are playing this song, then they'll spot our tasty worm. So here's a clip of some of the pipits being quite excited by one of the traps that we've set. They've obviously seen the worm, and they might be interested to take a little bite. And hopefully, if the bird then goes in the trap, this allows us to safely collect the bird from the trap. And once we do this, then we take lots of measurements from the birds. So this tells us something about their morphology. So that's their physical characteristics, which are obviously determined by their genetics. So we carefully put a ring on their leg. This has a unique identifier, so that we know that we've only collected that one bird once. And then we take many measurements. So we measure their bill, so that's their beak, and we'll measure their head length and also their weight. And as well as that, we'll take a blood sample. And so we take these blood samples so that we can later look at their genetics in the lab. Every island that we go to, we collect, hopefully hundreds of birds, and then once we've collected them, we safely release them in the same spot that we collected them. So a few months later and a few hundred birds later, myself and my team head back on a boat, and usually a flight, back to the UK to start my lab work from all the samples that we've collected. So first we extract the DNA from the blood samples, and then look at whether we can detect any disease in these samples also. So we identify the DNA of individual birds through a process called DNA sequencing. All DNA consists of 4 letters, A, T, C and G, and this sequencing tells us the order of these letters in an organism's DNA. So significant parts of these these DNA sequences in an organism tell us the template which are needed to make genes. Some genes are known to be important for adaptation to disease, for example. So here I'm using a process called PCR, which allows you to determine whether this particular bird sequence has any sign of any particular diseases. So this is called polymerase chain reaction. So it breaks down a small section of a gene that we're interested in and says, does a particular bird have this sequence or does it not? So here I'm just pipetting individual samples from this PCR reaction. Each sample is put into a different well on this gel. So this is made from agar. And then we're going to run a gel electrophoresis, which is essentially where you run a current across this gel in a buffer liquid, and see where your DNA runs to. So if an individual has got diseases which we're looking for, so in particular I'm interested in seeing if my birds have malaria, then they will have a dark band at a particular point on this gel when I visualise it. And if they don't have any malaria, then I should expect to see no band whatsoever. We're interested in these diseases and really across this population where we visited back in March. Last year we found that there were 70% of individuals that have malaria. So these are my results from this year. So I was out in the field in February and March. And here I'm just looking at a set of about 20 birds from this year. So on this visualization, it's just showing me using UV light to see if we can visualize these different bands. So in this particular subset of these birds, you can see roughly half of them have a white band, which indicates about half of these individuals have malaria. So once I have these results, I use a powerful computer to identify the genes that are important for survival and to identify these traits under selection. So what I mean by this is the traits that allow a bird to be more or less likely to survive and breed, and therefore pass these genes on to the next generation. And this is kind of similar to Darwin's work on the Galapagos finches. So he was interested in beak evolution across multiple different species of finches in the Galapagos Islands, and these birds have clearly got a radiation of different evolutionary traits for their bill morphology that allow them to survive and feed on different food. While my project is heavily ecology focused, it also incorporates lots of other areas of science, like computing, for example. So most science doesn't just involve studying one subject in isolation, like you may do at school, but instead draws together lots of skills from lots of different areas, and this can make it quite exciting to work on lots of different projects all at once that may involve lots of things that you enjoy.
So why do I do what I do? I mainly do it because I'm really excited and interested in the questions that I get to answer. So science takes you to a lot of different parts of the world that are really exciting to visit. I've been on the cliffs of Portugal trying to catch migratory birds with other projects, and also worked in RSPB reserves up in South Stack in Anglesey in Wales. And these places are fascinating, and I've really enjoyed my time shared with other research groups. But I think it's also really important to answer these questions as to why, how human impacts are affecting the natural world. And so I think that these results from my PhD, for example, may have impacts on conservation priority species that might be vulnerable to extinction, and I find that really exciting that they might have that influence in the longer term. So for me, where to next? Well, as I said, I have one final year to finish my PhD, which will involve a lot of writing. But after that, I hope that I'll hopefully be able to continue doing research in answering similar questions. So next in the career stage could potentially be to do a postdoc, which is essentially after I've finished my PhD, which is this second degree with a postgraduate qualification. A postdoc will allow me to continue research in a new question for maybe another few years, and that sort of may lead me on to a research career. Alternatively, I hope that maybe I'll get a job in a research organisation or conservation organisation, performing research for them on conservation priority species. I've been unsure at several stages of my career so far as to what options to choose. So I remember at GCSEs and A-levels being unsure as to what subjects to take, and the same again at the university, choosing which of the universities to go to. But I'd just say that pick something that you're really excited by and that you're good at, and hopefully that will result in you feeling fulfilled and excited by where you end up. My work so far has taken me to some really exciting places, and working with really wonderful people, and doing something that makes me feel excited. So I hope that you also get to make the same choices and enjoy what you do. So good luck to all of you.